want to start by giving you at least a little bit of a handle into what this thing is that we call authentic demand, why we think it's such an important piece of the overall process that we've developed, which is a process we call authentic innovation, and maybe help you think about things in your own lives a little bit differently, given that we found ourselves having to do that for ourselves. I would say a lot of what I'm going to tell you about is motivated by not desiring to fail. Something that I can share with you, I've done many times. And failure each time really sucks. But it's also very orienting if you spend time trying to understand what it is that causes you to fail. And I want to hold you close to a place that is at the heart of what we think is causing almost all startup failure. And it's not an obvious thing. So I want to bring you close to it so you can maybe see it for what it is. It's something that we've come to call authentic demand. We think of it as the force that animates a successful, sustainable business. It's the force that animates a successful startup. It's the thing that changes when you go from, I think this is going to work, and I'm articulating all the arms and legs of this thing that I built using all the money that our investors gave us, and if they ever stop giving us money, it will no longer seem quite as alive, to it actually being alive and having a place in the world and being able to run. We call that force, this animating force, we call it authentic demand. And it's a different kind of thing than you normally think about as demand. It's the kind of thing that happens when, if you're the company, it feels like you've just explained something to someone who would be your customer, and they stand there transfixed at the possibility that you might be meaningful in their life. If you're a person who's experiencing authentic demand, and it's a little hard to say this in the right way, so I don't want to get you going in crazy directions, but it's kind of like what it feels like when you've discovered that the Beatles are going to do a new concert, back when everybody was alive, and I should think a group that's alive, and you might be able to get tickets, and you think about what is it that you're willing to do to make that happen. The feeling that a customer has when they're in the grip of an authentic demand is that it's just going to happen. And I'm going to tell you more about what that feels like. But the feeling from the point of view of the company is that the world has now organized itself in some way that it demands from you something that you can't help but figure out how to produce. That's a lot different than most people think it is, or most people experience it to be, what they think that you're doing when they're doing a startup, which is to make it, and I'm going to convince some people to use it as a free data until they get hooked on it, then they'll start paying me. That's not authentic demand. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something else. We're talking about being able to see customers so clearly for who they are and the situations they find themselves in that it really isn't plausible that they're not customers. And we think that, except for the weird cases where someone comes and buys your company because of some reason that has nothing to do with it actually being a business, we think that to actually be in business, to have a sustaining entity, that authentic demand is actually required, and so you might as well pay attention to trying to find it. And when you see failure, most often the failure happens not because of bad execution, although that can kill you, not because money didn't show up, although that can certainly kill you, but most often the failure is actually attributable, we think, back to this fundamental problem, which is there wasn't actually authentic demand, or there was authentic demand, but you didn't understand what it was. And the purpose of this workshop is to maybe explicate that a little bit and talk about how one might actually look for authentic demand and find it, or what gets in the way. So there it is. It's an animating force. It's actually it's surprisingly a lot like electricity in the sense that it's unbelievably powerful. It's not like gravity, which is weak. It's like electricity, which is strong. In fact, it's so strong that you don't actually see it. Why don't you see it? Because it's such a powerful force, this animating force, this authentic demand, that it just drags the parts together. And once they're together, the authentic demand is hidden. It hides. You can't really stand there and say, okay, they're shaking hands. Why? I don't know. They're shaking hands. Why? Where'd the authentic demand go? It was there before they shook hands. Now they're shaking hands. You can't tell once they're shaking hands. It's a very disorienting position to see because around you, there have been situations in which there was authentic demand that's now been resolved in some fashion. And that's what you see. But by the time you see it, what it was that was the draw is gone. We make up stories, we attribute all sorts of reasons and motives. They're not the truth. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So I'll tell you that we know a lot about this. It draws from many, many different disciplines. A lot of it draws from psychology, it turns out. A lot of it draws from behavioral decision theory, things that people have won Nobel Prizes for over just the last couple of decades. It changes everything in your perception of how the world works to start to dig into this. I'm just going to try to do a little bit to change the way you think about this, let you know what kinds of things we think about. But here's the first principle. It's an odd one. Maybe you've heard me say it before. If you want to understand what people do in terms of, and what drives authentic demand, what's at the heart of it, it's a very simple notion that doesn't seem like it should be so, it doesn't seem simple, it sounds kind of complicated. It's that you can't actually make much sense, it turns out, of explaining what people do because you think you understand what they do. But if you look at it this other way, and you say, look, if you really understood what they were doing, if you had a really good explanation, here's what must be true. It must be true that no one's going to come along with an explanation that is convincing that they're not going to do it. Because if they did that, you couldn't have them do it. You can try practicing saying that at home if you want. It comes out easily only after like 1,000th time. But it's not like you can go back to high school and say, I'm going to erase a double negative, because actually you can't erase a double negative in the sentence. It actually has a meaning to it. And the meaning to it is, can you see that in this situation, if you understood that person right, the way you understand them, it doesn't really make sense for them not to do something. Because if they didn't do it, what it meant was either you got the situation wrong, or you didn't understand them right. That turns out to be an achievable position, we think. It's very difficult to see it. It's almost impossible to see it once it's happened. In fact, a lot of times, when it's happened, they are doing it. So you can't see what it is that they're not doing it. It's a difficulty. Now, you sometimes can break things to try to see what it is. But I'm trying to explain to you, give you an intuition or a feel for what it is that makes it so hard to be able to see the authentic demand in the world, because it's not apparent. It's almost never present. It's there, but not apparent. It's hidden from you. Now, what hides it from you is a very interesting thing, which you might call a waking dream. I don't need to make this too disturbing, but you're all living in a waking dream. We're all walking around in a waking dream. It's a waking dream version of the world. We have a replica of the world in our head. It is not the world. One of the difficulties we have is that the world in our head feels to us like the world. The world is tremendously more nuanced. It has much more detail. It actually, in a way, is much stranger than the world in your head works. In fact, one of the telling characteristics that you can tell that whether you're listening to something which sounds like it's an awakened dream versus the real, is that the waking dream sounds like fiction and the real world doesn't. And the difference between fiction and reality is that fiction has to make sense. The waking dream that you live within tremendously gets in your way of being able to see what's actually happening, that's at the heart of the thing that you want to see, which is the actual authentic demand. I want to share with you some of the ways that we've identified, and many more that we've identified, but some of the top ways we've identified that get in the way of your being able to recognize that you're living in a waking dream version of the world. And that by not noticing that you're living in a waking dream, or your discussions are a waking dream, or the ways that you're seeing people are in a waking dream, cause you to not be able to see what's actually happening. The first is that any time you're having a conversation about other people or about yourself, in which you're saying things like, they are going to buy this because they want it, or they buy this because they need it, or this will save them money, then here's what I can tell you. You are talking about behaviors and reasons that sit in the waking dream version of the world, and they are not the world. The waking dream version of the world has people doing things because they want to. There's been a lot of study now in psychology, social psychology, behavioral decision theory, to try to understand what it is that causes us to have these cognitive errors, to make mistakes or have biases as we're thinking about things that feel right to us but may not be actually right. A great example of that is what's called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is once you think you know something, every example you see seems to confirm it. By the way, the examples that disconfirm it, you don't even notice them, amazingly enough. It's even worse than that. The disconfirming examples, if someone were to actually show them to you, and you believe that they're disconfirming, your reaction isn't to change what you think. Your reaction is to say, oh, that's a special case. And you would think that would be, oh, if that was not bad enough, let me say it was really bad, there's a doubling down effect. When someone actually convinces you that this is a disconfirmation of something that you're sure is right, and you believe them, at that moment, chances are what you've now done is doubled down on the original theory, and you just don't want to hear it. A lot of political debates look like this when you start to think about it. In this case, we walk around and we say, you know what, every time I've ever done something, if I look at myself and I bought that car, why did I buy the car? I wanted it. Why did I eat that lunch? I wanted it. Why did you buy that? You wanted it. Here's the thing. Let me point out all the disconfirmations. What about all the things that I want that I don't do? What about all the things that that customer wants but doesn't do? Those are all disconfirmations of the plausibility that understanding what somebody wants would be any indicator of what they do. There's no information there, actually. It just feels like there's information there. So here's what I know. If we're talking to a founder, or we're talking to an investor, or we're talking to customers, and the conversation gets around to, well, I'll do that because I need it, or I'll do that because I want it, that's a conversation that's in the waking dream version of the world. That's not a conversation of the world. And it's extraordinarily unlikely to be something that's actually true about the world or true about authentic demands. It's puzzling. Here's another thing that's quite puzzling for us. In the waking dream version of the world, there are products, and when you show them to people, they can tell you whether they delight them. That you think it's a product that they think that they're delighted by, and that you interpret that in some way as saying something about for what there is authentic demand, is a complete confusion in your mind. You can't actually find out what you want to find. This is very disturbing because people are running around saying, well, we should make minimum viable products, we should do all these iterations, which seems like a very good idea, by the way. I wish it was a good idea. Let me just point out the difficulty with it. Like, maybe you've heard me say this before, but here's the difficulty. Imagine the following scenario. It's not a scenario, it's a real situation. A young woman walks home from work. It's been a really hard week, really tough. Really, she's dragging. She's put everything in the office. She comes to the front of her house, and she walks up the front path, and out of the front door of her house bursts the cutest little girl you ever saw. She runs right up to her mom, and she says, Mommy, Mommy, I made you a mud pie, Mommy. Mommy, I made you a mud pie. And the mother reaches around and says, oh, that's the most beautiful mud pie I ever saw. That's exactly what I wanted. I didn't even know I wanted that. Oh, thank you so much. I see how much effort you put in. You see, in that circumstance, all the participants are being genuine and authentic and true. The little girl really did make a mud pie thinking that it would be just what her mother wanted. She did make it perfect. The mother really authentically was delighted by that mud pie. It meant everything. It was exactly what she wanted, even though she didn't know what she wanted. The problem is, that little girl would be making a mistake if she thought that there were other mothers in the neighborhood that wanted mud pies. And she'd probably be making a mistake if she even thought this mother wants a mud pie tomorrow. The product is mud pie. As you walk around in the waking dream version of the world, you think you understand what this thing that you make is. And you think you understand what it means to the person who looks at it. You don't. That's a waking dream version of the world that you're operating in. And as long as your conversations and as long as the work you do remain in the waking dream version of the world, all you're learning is about the waking dream. You're not learning about what you have to learn about, which is the authentic demand, and that exists in a different part of the world, not the waking dream part. I'll give you a third example, if you like. Third example is, and this is, can I assume that we're all post-enlightenment? So pre-enlightenment, you could figure out how things work by asking other people. Like, do you think heavy things fall faster than light things? Heavy things, 2 pound weight, 1 pound weight. What do you think? Is that true? You know, for 2,000 years, that way of knowing, which is you ask a lot of people what their opinions are about something, sufficed until someone actually does the experiment and discovers that heavy things actually fall at the same speed as light things. It's not a way of knowing to argue by analogy, especially analogies in the real world. Our product, by the way, is going to go on this shelf. When it goes on that shelf, it's really indistinguishable to the consumer from that product that's sitting right next to it. And that product sells through at this rate, therefore our product will too. I can't tell you how many introductions of drinks have failed on the shores of that bad argument. Or products that have failed to actually sell because our product is just like their product, only a little bit different, therefore we should get at least as much sales. It just doesn't work that way. That's not what authentic demand looks like. You can't see it in the waking dream version of the world. You have to see it in the world as it is. People don't have access to the world as it is. They don't. They have access to their waking dream version of the world. You go and you talk to a customer and say, is this something you would want? Tell me what you would want. Tell me your pain points. Here's what I'm going to tell you. They don't have access to that information. I don't know why you're asking. Feels like you should ask. Wouldn't it be nice? In the waking dream version of the world, your customers have access to the information about how to make decisions. It's just not true. What I'm trying to explain is at its heart, what we've discovered is the central cause of almost all startup and all innovation failure, which is the work is being done in a waking dream version of the world. And we don't notice the cognitive errors we make and the cognitive biases that we bring to it that stop us from noticing that the version of the world that we think we are working with is not the world. The problem then is to fight that. The problem is then to find tools and methods and means to fight it. It turns out that we're in good company, but not in the startup space. But there are people who have figured this out before us. People have done it theoretically in the psych literature and behavioral decision theory and behavioral economics. People that are moving around enormous amounts of money. For example, the Bridgewater Capital Fund, which is the most successful, largest capital fund in the world that Ray Dalio founded, is founded on the principles that I just described to you. And Katina Stefanova, who's former COO, is now engaging with us and getting interested with us in this work that we're doing at this, how do we deploy capital and time and energy with early stage resources that are similar to the kinds of things that have been working so well to make decisions with much larger amounts of capital.